What is going on, everybody? If you can see on my shirt, I have Mia Goth's Pearl here today. And the reason for that is I'm going to do another topic or recommendation video today. And I'm going to talk about horror movie prequels. The film The First Omen is coming out this weekend, which is a prequel to the original film The Omen. And there have been a ton of horror movie prequels over the years, some really good and some not so good. And I thought today I would talk about some of my favorite horror movie prequels and ones that I actually think are worth your time watching. And I'm really hoping The First Omen is worth watching. The trailer looks fantastic. I've heard a lot of really good things from initial screenings, and I'm going to check it out this weekend. But today I want to talk about some of my favorite horror movie prequels. First up, I'm going to start with Final Destination 5. And yes, Final Destination 5 is a prequel. It was not advertised as a prequel, and you actually figure out that it's a prequel very late into the film. But this is actually my favorite film in the Final Destination series. I feel like a lot of people that hear about this series are kind of just really quick to brush it off and don't really pay a lot of attention to it. And I think this series is incredibly entertaining because, as goofy and over the top of a premise as it is, it never takes itself too seriously, which is what I like about it. There are some truly comedic, over the top, dumb moments in it, but there's also some really grisly horror. And that's what I like so much about the fifth installment. I think the cast of characters they get, they're really easy to watch. Their chemistry is really goofy and over the top. The kills in this are incredibly grisly in a way that, for a horror fan like me, I'm always interested as to how they're executed and how the filmmakers are able to convey things that are so intense. And I just had a lot of fun with this movie. I'd watched this whole series. I did a ranked list either last year or the year before. I watched all 5 films. The only film that I think is miserable and is hard to get through was the 4th film in the series. I absolutely hated it, but this film is up there with number 3 as my favorite in the series. And I thought it was really cool the way that they made it into a prequel. I thought that it was really interesting how they kind of shifted it at the end, and it was a really kind of a surprise. But despite that, it's just a really fun and entertaining and easy to watch horror movie that, if you're into movies that have pretty intense gore that can also be really silly and funny, the Final Destination series is worth checking out, and the 5th film in the installment is 100% worth your time. Up next is a more recent movie, and that is Orphan: First Kill. This is a movie that had been advertised for quite some time, that was a sequel to a movie made in, I believe, 2009, a very long time ago, where Isabel Fuhrman, who played the lead character of Esther in the first film, is much older now, and they talked about how they were gonna digitally de-age her in moments and like do things to make her look the way that she did in the first film, which, whenever you hear things like that, you always wonder how it's going to be executed. And I loved this movie. It is incredibly dumb and it's really over the top, but I think that's what makes it so entertaining. Is, like I said about Final Destination 5, it never takes itself too seriously. And when a movie can exist and kind of understand that if it paints itself in too serious of a picture, that it's going to come across as really lame, this movie knows it's supposed to be fun and goofy and schlocky, and it never kind of pulls back from that. I was hooked to the screen in every moment. I think Isabel Fuhrman gives an amazing performance in this, just really lives and breathes this character, and she is menacing in moments, she is hilarious in moments, and I liked that we got a little bit more into her character and her backstory from the first film. I think the surrounding cast of characters all does a really great job. There's some lines of dialogue in this movie that had me laughing so hard I almost cried. It's a little bit different in tone to the original, but I think that that's to the film's benefit, because I don't think you could necessarily mimic that tone completely and have a successful film. But whenever movies like this are made, you always sit back and you wonder, like, is this gonna be good? Is there any way they're gonna be able to make this thing as entertaining as the original? And I think they got pretty damn close. And if you've never seen either of the Orphan films, I would 100% recommend checking them out, because they're both really fun. Next, and it's on my shirt, is Ty West's Pearl. Ty West was able to craft two very different but very incredible horror movies in the same year, just months apart, was able to release them months apart. And I was a huge fan of X. X pays homage to slasher films in a way that's very true to what they're supposed to be, but also incredibly original in Ty West style. And obviously in that movie, it's a killer old woman, Pearl, and the film Pearl is flashing back to her when she was younger and kind of trying to figure out what got her to this place in her life. And what I love about Pearl is it's a very different movie, but it's stylistically brilliant. It's very much paying homage to a different era of filmmaking. It's very bright and vivid and colorful, but it's also dark and disturbing and violent. Mia Goth gives a comedically brilliant performance that also has amazing dramatic moments. I just think that Mia Goth is a phenomenal actress, and everything that I see her in, she constantly blows me away by her dedication to her role. And this is one of my favorite performances she's given in her entire career. Just the way that her character has to progress throughout the runtime of the film. It's remarkable to see that transformation in her character. And I think that she's just a remarkable actress. And Ty West does a really great job at shaping this world and kind of putting these twists and turns in this movie. And I'm really excited to see Maxine this year whenever it's slotted. I think it's supposed to come out in the summer. But this movie, it was so crazy to see a prequel film that just felt like something completely different than the original movie that was made. And the fact that Ty West has been doing movies in the horror genre for quite some time and has kind of jumped all over different genres and created what is arguably, in my opinion, his best work as a filmmaker with Pearl is just absolutely incredible. And I think even if you're not the biggest horror movie fan, Pearl is 100% worth watching because of the performances and because of that homage to a different age in Hollywood. Up next is Paranormal Activity 3. This is a series that I feel like people either love or hate. I'm a huge found footage fan, and I remember working at a movie theater when Paranormal Activity was first released, and people were like puking in the theater. There was all kinds of crazy things happening when the Paranormal Activity series was released. And I actually last year or a couple years ago watched the entire series from start to finish. I'd never watched all the movies. I saw the first two in the theater, and I don't think I ever watched any more of them. And in rewatching the series, I found the first film to be incredibly underwhelming. The second film was okay, not really anything special. But the third film honestly took me by surprise and is one of the better found footage films I've seen. They do such an amazing job at crafting this story, and it's surrounding these two characters that we know as adults that we're seeing as children. And whenever you put children in the mix of things like this that are so utterly terrifying, I think it makes the stakes a lot higher. But what I love about this movie is the creativity in the found footage. There's a sequence in particular that a lot of people talk about. This film takes place in like 1988, so everything's shot on like a consumer grade VHS camera, and there's so many creative methods into how the family is filming the paranormal events. There's one in particular where they put the camera on an oscillating fan, and I love the way that that works because it's practical to the time period. And I love how much thought there is in the way that this movie is filmed. And the first movie, the gimmick was just that it was the found footage setting up security cameras. The second movie was just kind of more of the same. But I feel like in this third movie, they really realized, hey, if we're going to keep doing this series, we've got to do something different. I think this movie has truly some of the most terrifying sequences in the entire series. And what I love so much about it, it's not necessarily just like jump scares. It's not just like things popping out, or like in the second movie when all the pans fall in the middle of the dining room. This movie is so much more about forcing you as an audience to stare at something that is really uncomfortable and unsettling. And it's my favorite movie in the entire Paranormal Activity franchise. I think even if you don't watch any of the other movies in the series, the third one is an outstanding example of how effective found footage filmmaking can be. And it's also just a really good prequel that gives you some more information as to why the things in the first and second movie were happening. And I love this movie a lot. It actually is one that I want to I wouldn't probably revisit the entire Paranormal Activity series, but I would definitely revisit at this movie. Up next, one of my favorite modern horror prequels, and that's Ouija: Origin of Evil from director Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan, as a lot of you out there know, is one of my favorite modern horror filmmakers. I love Mike's catalog. I think that between film and long-form television series, he's just incredible at creating amazing characters and worlds that are truly dramatic and beautiful in their family stories, but also incredibly horrifying. And Ouija: Origin of Evil nails that perfectly. I love the family dynamic in this movie. I think that it's nailed brilliantly. All of his actors give incredible performances, but I also think it's truly unsettling and horrifying. I rewatched this, I think, a year ago, and when I rewatched it, it still sent chills up my spine. I think, like I said, with Paranormal Activity 3, anytime the horror is centered around children and the child actors are really good and give great performances, it is unsettling and horrifying to see these terrible things happen to kids. And just the way Mike tells this story, it's bleak and it's unrelenting and it's dark. And I think to be a director and to make a horror film like this that's a prequel to a movie that was absolutely hated, the original Ouija, people couldn't stand it, the critics' reviews were awful, and this is just incredible. The way that he builds on this world, the supernatural elements and the way that they're incorporated are really unique. I love the storytelling, and it just keeps you on the edge of your seat until the very end of the movie. The thing I like about Mike Flanagan is he does a really great job at mixing practical effects and CGI, and I thought that his entire career. He's one of the few directors who does a really great job balancing the two, and this movie is a perfect example of that. And it's just an incredible modern horror prequel, and I know that there's like all kinds of opinions about this. Some people really hate it, some people think it's great. I love the family dynamic, and I think that having a strong emotional core like that in a horror movie is what can make horror so effective. And it's just a really fantastic film that I think more people need to watch. And I have to finish with my favorite horror movie prequel of all time, and that is Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. Some people say this isn't horror. I think it is 100% horror. Twin Peaks is probably my favorite television series of all time, and when David Lynch decided he wanted to do a Twin Peaks movie, he took everyone by surprise, and instead of doing a sequel so that people figured out what happened at the end of the series, he said, screw you guys, I'm going to make a prequel about Laura Palmer's life. And when this movie was released initially, it was released to really poor reviews, and I think that most of those reviews come from the fact that people were upset that they weren't getting a sequel, that they were getting a story that they didn't necessarily want. But years later, this film has developed a cult following. It is critically beloved. It's in the Criterion Collection, and for very good reason. This is deeply horrifying in the sense that there is creepy, surrealist imagery that is incredibly unsettling, that kind of gets to you as a viewer in a very visceral and uncomfortable way. But it's also a deeply saddening and traumatic story about a young high school student who is suffering sexual abuse and psychological damage, and turns to drug abuse and prostitution as a way to feel something. And it's incredibly saddening, but it's also a story that I think is incredibly important that David Lynch told to kind of show the trauma and the experience that so many people have to live through, and how someone like Laura Palmer, who is considered one of the most beloved people in her school, and how people look at her as like nothing could happen to her. She's so happy and bubbly and lovely and wonderful, but like she's hiding something deeply traumatic, and she puts on a face when she's around other people. And I think that's true to so many people, that not necessarily going through that level of deep psychological trauma, but so many people go through an experience and have to put on a face every single day to act like they're not really living through those things. And I think the way David Lynch conveys that in this movie is just really beautiful, and it's a movie that moves me to tears every time I watch it. I think Cheryl Lee's performance in this movie is one of the most impressive in all of film history. She is absolutely incredible. I actually saw a screening of this at one of my local movie theaters, and she was there and she did a Q&A, and it was remarkable to listen to her talk about this this performance, because when she played Laura Palmer in the Twin Peaks series, she really didn't get to do all that much because her character was already dead. So being able to give a full performance as this character who she really loved playing is amazing. And I think this is a remarkable film. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And if you've never seen it, watch the Twin Peaks series and then watch this movie. It's so worth your time. It's just an incredible experience. So what are some of your favorite horror movie prequels? Let me know in the comments. These are just some of my favorites. There have been a ton over the years, and I would love to hear yours. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.